A new poll shows Dallas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett with a double-digit lead over Austin State Representative James Talarico in the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate in Texas. According to the latest survey from the University of Texas Political Project, Crockett leads 56% to 44% among likely Democratic voters. The poll, though, was conducted February 2nd through the 16th, right before the much-debated Talarico-Colbert interview. It has a margin of error of plus or minus 5 points. It also found Crockett was especially strong with support from black voters, while Talarico had a narrow edge among white voters, while Hispanic voters were slightly in the Crockett column. Early voting for the March 3rd primary is already underway, and both campaigns are making their final appeals to Democratic voters ahead of next week's final contest. Joining me here in the studio to talk about all of this and more is HPM's politics and government reporter, Andrew Schneider. Andrew, welcome to the program.
Good to be here, Ernie.
I also want to remind folks, what are your thoughts on this poll? And what do you think about Crockett pulling away? Or are those numbers already outdated? Let us know what you think. 713-440-8870. Andrew, first thing we talked about when you mentioned this to me yesterday was the fact when it actually got taken, because that's so important, especially in a time like this.
Right. There's really no way to predict what could wind up upsetting the basic assumptions that you're making in a poll. Obviously, there was no way that people conducting this poll could have known what was happening at the Late Show with Stephen Colbert. When I spoke with Joshua Blank, who's the research director at the Texas Politics Project, he said, in effect, there are so many people who saw the unaired interview on YouTube. There's no way that it could not affect the primary. The question is by how much.
And folks were talking in that one interview that was then blocked and all the news circus that followed around it. Didn't he raise like $2.5 million in 24 hours? So
He
definitely
did.
There was something happening because of that.
Exactly, yes. And the question becomes where that money is being raised and how much of it can translate into votes. And this was obviously an interview that was meant to be aired nationally. It's been viewed nationally. So some of that money could be coming from people out of state who can't vote in the election.
It seemed as though before Crockett got into the race, of course, Talarico seemed like it was going to be somewhat of an easy street for him, I would almost say. Jasmine Crockett got in, and it seemed like she has slowly built momentum going. She, of course, had name recognition, if not just within the state, across the nation. Do you think, though, he can pull forward enough with that wide a margin at this point?
It's difficult to say. Talarico's released his own internal polling, which was also conducted before the unaired interview was supposed to hit TV screens, which showed him in the lead. It's always a challenge to figure out how much you can rely on those candidate-generated polls.
Right.
But I mean, one thing that's worth remembering just in terms of the trend in polling was that Jasmine Crockett was ahead in the polls even before she entered the primary back in December. Before that point, Talarico was relatively even with Colin Allred, who left the race when Crockett decided that she was going to get in. So it's really difficult to tell at this point. The one thing that you can say for certain is that Talarico had less of a name recognition advantage than Crockett did,
Right.
and that may be erased at this point.
So there was the whole issue that went on right before this, and this, I think, probably impacted the poll, the concern about the blogger who said she talked to Talarico, and Talarico said about Allred not being the greatest candidate. That's not the words he used, according to this blogger. That had a lot of impact, that made a big social sensation when that happened. That falls right in the beginning of this poll being taken. That was the big talking point. Then you get the Colbert thing, which is the other one that slants the scale. So it's fascinating to me how stories in social media and online can blow up and can shift elections so widely.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting, I mean, what Talarico's response was to that. I mean, he qualified, he said in response, he wasn't talking about he wasn't calling Allred a mediocre candidate. He said that he'd conducted his campaign.
If I remember correctly, the comment was made that he said he had entered this race expecting to go against a mediocre black man, not an accomplished or successful or however he
right.
worded it,
And
black woman.
what Talarico said in response was, that wasn't what I said. I said something to the effect of, he was criticizing Allred's campaign against Cruz as having been conducted in a mediocre fashion. But you're right. I mean, the impact of social media, the ability of social media to impact a race even at this late stage is a fascinating subject. And it plays into the trends that we've been seeing ever since late January with the race, which had been conducted in a relatively courteous fashion up until that point, has gone severely negative.
Right.
Maybe not to the level that we're seeing on the Republican side, but Talarico has been releasing ad after ad, a lot of which has been, or rather, excuse me, I should qualify this. A super PAC that has aligned itself with Talarico has unleashed an ad campaign that basically questions whether whether Crockett is electable in a general election against any of the Republican candidates.
I want to talk more about that. I want to remind everyone the number here, 713-440-8870. You're going to need to pop on your headphones right now because William from Galveston is on the line. William, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Ernie. Thank you for taking my call. I'm a political independent, but I have not really found the capacity to back any of the GOP candidates or incumbents in our state. So I will be voting for whichever of the two Democrat senator candidates wins this election. My own perspective, and I'm not a political wonk, so I don't put too much weight on my opinion, but my opinion is that it's probably more likely that Crockett will win the Democratic nomination, and it would be much more likely that Talarico would actually win a general election in the fall. We haven't had a Democrat win a statewide election since 1994, and I think Talarico, especially as someone who works across the aisle legislatively and who speaks in terms of bringing people together, probably is less red meat exciting to the Democrat partisans, but would be much more likely to be appealing to the general population. That's my comment.
William, thank you for that. It also mirrors another comment that came in online from my British computer guy who says, I think it was predicted that Jasmine Crockett might do better in this election, but that she would have a harder time winning in the midterm itself. Andrew, let me ask you this, and William, thank you for calling. When this conversation, when this school of thought is brought up, it's in this particular race, it's getting pulled into terms of racism and in some ways almost bigotry against, because they're saying a black woman can't do what a white man can. Is there a way to separate race out of that conversation and talk about what we see trend-wise in the state? Or is this school of thought that a lot of people have outdated at this point in voting trends we've seen?
I think it's really difficult to separate them out in a state like Texas, where, and this is something that we saw play out in the fight over redistricting last year. Mm-hmm. The whole question over, what is partisan, redistricting for a partisan advantage versus what is racial gerrymandering. When you have, the black population of the state registered much more heavily not registered, because we don't have voter registration. We don't have party voter registration in Texas. But when you have voter participation much more intensely on one side than the other, then that can tend to get tied up in the whole situation. I will say, and this was a point that you made earlier. There were two demographics that Crockett demonstrated to have a significant advantage over Talarico in the most recent Texas Politics Project survey. That was with black voters and that was with women. And those tend to be the most reliable participants in Democratic primaries. Whether that translates to participation in the general election is another question.
I want to grab another call, but I know there's a couple other things we want to hit on before we have to move on from this segment. So let's grab Betty from the Heights at 713-440-8870. Betty, what's on your mind?
Hi. The polling numbers that you're citing are outdated.
Right.
And of course, as we all know, they were taken before Talarico's interview on Colbert.
Right.
Public policy polling is out this morning with new numbers showing Talarico at 48%, Congresswoman Crockett at 42%, and about 10% undecided. So,
remind me again, which poll is this?
It's public policy polling.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, I was concerned, and as we were talking about a moment ago, because moments in social media, in news, in the zeitgeist can shift polling so quickly these days. It's hard when traditional polling is taken and it happens, and then something like the Late Show event happens. It can sway things and shift them.
Yeah, and there's always a big question that becomes involved. Once you get to a certain point relative to the election, is the polling itself influencing people's voting patterns?
Yeah. Betty, thank you very much for calling. I've mentioned before that I started out in this business at NBC in election and news polling, and our boss used to tell us there, 2 weeks before an election, he could give you the answer to who was going to win by, I want to say, like 0.1% of vote, unless something catastrophic happened. And he's like, in those moments when a big story breaks, when a piece of information becomes suddenly relevant, it so quickly can sway everything. And we're seeing that go back and forth here. It's going to make for an interesting election night. And I say that because you and I are going to be live on air on election night starting at 8 p.m. right here on News 88.7.
That's right.
We're going to be watching early returns as they come in. Quickly, speaking of early returns, one thing that gets released on election night is the early vote, and the mail-in votes are coming in. What can you tell people about mail-in voting?
There were some policy changes at the Postal Service, one in April of last year, the other on Christmas Eve, that basically add at least a day to the time between a mail-in ballot is sent and when it receives the postmark that it needs to be legally admissible in the state. In order to count, the ballot needs to be postmarked by I think it's like 7 p.m. On election day itself.
But then it still needs to get in by the next day to the county, correct?
Right, but the problem is on the way that the rule changes are going to affect. You could mail a ballot at your local post office, then it has to be sent to a regional processing center, and because the number of pickups per day has been reduced, that could wind up taking an extra day. And at this point in the campaign, that could be really significant. Yeah. So if you're going to mail in your ballot, you should really think about doing that today if you want to absolutely ensure that it's going to count.
Yeah, that is worrisome. So once again, to echo what Andrew just said, if you are planning to mail in your ballot, mail it in today. Is that good advice?
Yes.
That's good advice. One other thing, a lot of people are concerned, we've only got about a minute left, but talk about the propositions. People are confused about those. We did a segment earlier this week on it, too.
Okay. Ballot propositions on the primary elections are different from those in the general elections. In the general elections, they're basically you're voting on a potential amendment to the state constitution. It will have the force of law if it passes. On the primary ballot, effectively, you're participating in a survey by one of the two parties as to the importance of various different party planks for their party platforms that they're going to be adopting later in the year. That's particularly important on the Republican side because, barring a political earthquake, they will control the state legislature again next year. So something that's on the Republican Party platform could wind up having the force of law down the road.
Okay, and there we've got to leave it, but that's not the end of HPM Politics and Government reporter Andrew Schneider. He will be live with me online, on air, on YouTube, on election night, starting at 8 o'clock right here on News 88.7. Andrew, get back to that fine reporting. You can read his reports and everything he does over at HoustonPublicMedia.org.